Episode 11, Carmens Bronco Shop. I'm Carmen. So this episode, we're going to install the transfer case, the transmission, and the engine. And it's going to be pretty cool. It's almost amazing that you can install all these items and paint them and make them look fantastic in about 12 minutes. It's just, it's the magic of television, or whatever it is we're doing here. Anyway, stick with us. Here we go. Okay, so I've taken and I've put some gasket sealer around the edge of the transfer case. I'm going to put the gasket in place, and I'm going to slowly level the transmission down into place. It should go smoothly. Should. So we're at the point where it's fitting in just perfect. I mean, it has to. It's no surprise. But what you do have to be careful of, transmission has got a shaft on the end of it, okay? It's got to slide into the transfer case. It has to slide in nice and smoothly. You can't be banging it and crashing around. And then there's also a lip. I'll just pull it a little bit there. Now it's nice and snug. It's sitting right where it needs to go. And we'll take and we'll set these bolts. We'll get them started. There's 6 of them. And one of the nice things about this is that all 6 bolts are exactly the same. There's no difference in length or anything like that. So you can't make a mistake and put one longer bolt into a sleeve that's shorter. You know, that can happen in some other areas of the build. So there you have it. Transfer case is, well, it was in. Transmission is bolted up to the transfer case. Now I'm going to take a couple hours and I'm going to clean the transmission up really nice. And if I don't have to, if I can polish up this aluminum, that's what I'm going to do. If I can't, then I've got some silver spray that, you know, that'll also make it look really nice. But, I mean, 40 years, it's never been painted, and it still looks, you know, it still looks good. So that's what I would like to do. When we're done with that, the torque converter is going to be installed in the front here. Okay, so obviously that's good. This is where the 4 bolts come through the torque converter into the flex plate. Nothing confusing there. It's all exactly the way it's supposed to be. So that's great. Next step is to, actually there's also a dust plate that has to be mounted to the engine, but I'll show you that in 2 seconds. Okay, so the next step, of course, is to make sure that the dust plate, or whatever you want to call this, fastens up. Perfect. Now here's an interesting point as well. This is the end of the crankshaft, and here's the holes that fasten to the flex plate, okay? So what you've got to make sure of when you bolt that up is that you use a sealer on these bolts. because these bolts go right through into the crankcase, the bolt holes. And if you don't, you're going to have an oil leak. Down the road, it's just going to be dripping out, and you're going to see it, you're going to say, where the heck is that oil come from? You'll be tightening up all your gaskets around your oil pan, you'll be doing all kinds of things, but you won't be able to get at that because that'll be hidden up inside. So don't forget, on this motor at least, you've got to seal your bolts. Use some gasket sealer or some other sealer or anything like that, just to seal the threads that go in the end of the crankshaft here. Okay, so look at that, nice and clean. That's your hole for your starter on that side, so everything is good. Okay, so the next step here is fastening the flex plate to the back of the motor. And we've already got the dust protection here. So it is also a metal gasket, however you want to look at it. But you have to be careful here now. So there are 6 bolts at the back of the flex plate, and they have to line up properly. And that's all important because that dictates your balancing and everything for the motor. Okay, so that's it there. So, flex plate is installed. I had to spin it around this way so I could rest the flex plate on this 4x4 here so it wouldn't spin around, so I could keep the engine lined up. Anyway, torque wrench set at 80 pounds and ran around them. They're all good. So now we're going to take and spin the engine around. So when you're looking at a torque converter, I guess they're all different, but these ones for the C4 have 2 little notches. So these notches have to go in the right spot, and there's also splines way inside here. So everything actually has to, you have to mess around with it a little bit, and if you're not careful, you can put it on but not put it on far enough, which is a real drag if you don't do that properly. You can end up with all sorts of problems. Okay, so first off, there's your first notch. And there's your second one, and there's your third one. So if you weren't careful, so if you look now, I don't know if you can see me down here, but the bolts that come out of the torque converter are almost hidden inside the edge of the bellows housing. Okay, so that's in great shape. Now we've got to match. I got to spin the engine around, and we've got to match it up to the transmission and bolt everything together. So I'm stopping the production right here. I had to actually drop the motor and take the chain and spin it around because it was just putting too much of a strain on the chain, and I couldn't get things to hang right. Anyway, so now we're at the point, you can see here, where the flex plate is right up against the transmission. We got to kind of move it back a tiny bit, slide it down into place, and then those 4 bolts that I showed you in the torque converter before are going to fit into the 4 bolt holes on the flex plate. And you kind of put a nut on each one, and you work your way around and diagonally and tighten them up. And this is a little awkward. And it's not because I don't have any friends, but I guess I can say this now. Obviously, I'm taping things on the production side of it at slightly different dates that I'm doing some of my openings and closing and introductions and whatnot. But anyway, this is March the 21st, so we're in the middle of the isolation because of the coronavirus. So luckily, I've got a job inside here that I can do, but unfortunately, I can't get any of my buddies to come help me with heavy things like this because they're in isolation too. So anyway, enough said about that, but that's, if anybody's wondering, why doesn't that guy get somebody to help him? Well, that's the reason. I do have friends. Okay guys, so there you have it. And the last thing I said before I shut the camera off is I would tell you if I had any problems or if there's any screw-ups. And it's so important. The torque converter. I showed you how I had adjusted it and I'd gotten it in 3 slots. I still didn't have it far enough. So when I was trying to mate the engine to the transmission, it was going together, but then all of a sudden it would be cockeyed and it wouldn't flush up. But I learned a long time ago to be patient, and I didn't ram any bolts tight or anything like that. I kept messing with it. I said, no, things aren't right. So anyway, I pulled the engine back out and I messed with the torque converter, and sure enough, it went in another inch further, or sorry, at least another ½ inch further. So it allowed the engine to mate up the way it's supposed to. Anyway, that's what you got to do. When you're working on something and it's not going smooth, just step back from it for 2 seconds, have a look at it, and see if maybe you're doing something wrong. Because hey, we make mistakes all the time. The important thing is not to make it too costly. Anyhow, so these bolts that fasten the transmission to the back of the engine, they torque in at about 26 pounds. So I'm going to torque those in, and that's basically it for this. Let's take a look at what we got. So there's your rebuilt transfer case, rebuilt transmission, new torque converter, brand new motor, everything. And now it's kind of, the frame is dirty, it's all dusty and everything from coming back after it came back from the sandblaster. So I'm going to clean that up and get started on installing the gas tank and some of the brake lines and of course the fuel lines and the front of the engine. The harmonic balancer's got to be put on it, water pump, all that sort of thing. And I can do a fair amount before I start putting the body back on. So there you have it. Engine's in, transmission's in, transfer case is in, and next episode, it's getting a little more technical. So we're installing a brand new gas tank, and we're installing the fuel injection lines up to the motor. There's part of the episode includes drilling a hole through the gas tank, showing the way that that's done so that your return line, the aeration from that doesn't affect the intake line from your gas tank. So this is good, especially if anybody's considering the installation of EFI on the Broncos, because that's what we've got. We've got the Holly Sniper. Anyway, stick with us. Next week is going to be exciting, and if you like what you're seeing, please hit the subscribe button. It's important. Thank you very much, and have yourself a fantastic day.